Chapter 1. Arrival at the cabin. Diego had always dreamed of a quiet life, away from the noise of the city. So when he inherited a small cabin in a remote forest from his grandfather, he thought it was the perfect place to start over. His grandfather had lived there until his death, and although he was always reserved about his life in the forest, Diego remembered the calm on his face when he talked about nature. The first day he arrived, Diego felt the peace he had longed for. The cabin, although old, had a cozy charm, with its wooden walls and a small fireplace in the center of the room. However, as soon as night fell, he felt a change in the atmosphere. The forest, which seemed so serene during the day, now emitted strange sounds, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. As he tried to sleep, he heard what sounded like footsteps shuffling around the cabin. He thought it might be some wild animal, but there was something disturbing about those footsteps, as if they were deliberate, careful. Diego decided to ignore it, convinced it was his imagination. Chapter 2. The first signs. Over the next few days, Diego tried to adapt to life in the cabin, exploring the forest and enjoying the fresh air. However, the whispers and footsteps at night became more and more persistent. Even during the day, he felt a presence that seemed to watch him from between the trees. Although he never saw anyone, as he explored the surroundings, he found a series of stones arranged in circles and strange figures. It was evident that someone had been there before him. He remembered the stories his grandfather told him about the forest, mentioning that he should always respect it and never walk alone after dark. Upon returning to the cabin, he found a note on his table that he did not remember leaving. The note, written in ancient calligraphy, said, "Do not disturb. They are always watching." Diego felt a chill. No one else was supposed to have access to the cabin, but the note seemed to warn him of something unknown. Chapter 3. The story of the forest. Intrigued and somewhat scared, Diego decided to investigate more about the forest and the cabin. He headed to the nearby town and began asking the inhabitants, but no one seemed to want to talk about the forest. Only one old woman dared to tell him something vague about spirits and ancient guardians. According to her, the forest was inhabited by entities that protected the place and did not tolerate human presence for long. The old woman warned him that he should not be alone in the cabin. According to her, his grandfather was only able to live there because he had made some sort of pact with the guardians of the forest. Diego laughed, thinking it was just superstitions, but a part of him was beginning to feel that something strange and ancient really did inhabit those trees. Chapter 4. First encounters. Back at the cabin, Diego began to experience unexplainable phenomena. The nights were becoming more and more disturbing. Whispers became clear, yet incomprehensible. Voices and the creaking of branches around the cabin sounded like footsteps getting closer and closer. One morning, he woke up startled by the sound of someone calling his name from the woods. The voice was faint, almost like a whisper that mixed with the wind, but it was clear enough that Diego couldn't ignore it. Determined to confront what was happening, he grabbed a flashlight and left the cabin. Moving in the direction of the voice, the deeper he went into the woods, the stronger the feeling that someone was watching him became. The trees seemed to close the path around him, and the shadows took on disturbing shapes that faded away. When he tried to focus the flashlight on them, finally He decided to turn back, but realized that he was completely disoriented and the cabin was no longer in sight. Chapter 5. The Labyrinth of Shadows. Lost in the woods, Diego began to panic. Voices whispered his name from all directions, and the flashlight flickered weakly as if something was draining its energy. He began to run, hoping to find some trace of the cabin, but the forest seemed endless. Every tree and every stone looking the same as the last. Suddenly, the flashlight stopped working, and Diego was left completely in the dark. The silence was absolute until he suddenly heard a different voice, deep and serious, that said to him, "We warned you, the forest is no place for the living after night." Desperate, Diego tried to apologize, speaking out loud and begging to find his way back. It was then that the shadows around him began to move, taking humanoid shapes that surrounded him. Diego felt his body weaken, as if the shadow's energy was draining him. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Just when he thought his end was near, the shadows faded and the flashlight turned on again. Diego saw the figure of an older man in front of him, his grandfather, or at least what seemed to be him. The figure watched him with a mix of sadness and warning, and then disappeared into the trees. Diego understood at that moment that his grandfather had made some kind of pact to protect himself in the forest, a pact that he had broken by not following the rules and entering the forest at night. Now he had to face the consequences. Chapter 7. The Lost Pact. Back at the cabin, Diego found an old book hidden under one of the floorboards. It was a journal of his grandfather, where he detailed the pact he had made with the forest's guardians. The pact involved not disturbing the forest, respecting its rules, and offering a weekly offering in a specific clearing. Diego understood at that moment that his grandfather had made some kind of pact to protect himself in the forest, a pact that he had broken by not following the rules and entering the forest at night. Now he had to face the consequences. Chapter 7. The Lost Pact. Back at the cabin, Diego found an old book hidden under one of the floorboards. It was a journal of his grandfather, detailing the pact he had made with the forest guardians. The pact involved not disturbing the forest, respecting its rules, and offering a weekly offering in a specific clearing. Diego decided to perform the same ritual, hoping to appease the entities that watched him every night. He prepared an offering of flowers, fruit, and wine, following the instructions in the journal, and headed out to the clearing as night fell. Chapter 8. The ceremony. In the clearing, Diego placed the offering and repeated the words his grandfather had written in the journal. He felt a presence around him, as if the forest itself was watching his movements. As he recited the words, shadows began to form around him, but this time he felt no fear. Instead, he experienced a strange calm, as if the forest was giving him a chance at redemption. The shadows slowly dissolved, and Diego felt like he had fulfilled his part of the pact. The forest seemed to accept his presence, but he knew he could never break its rules again. Chapter 9. New life in the forest. Over the next few days, Diego noticed that the whispers had ceased and that the nights were now quiet. He began to live in harmony with the forest, respecting every tree and every animal he encountered. He knew that he should never venture into the forest after dark, and that every week he should renew his pact with the guardians. He discovered a peace he had never experienced before, a deep connection with nature and his grandfather's legacy. However, he still felt that the guardians were watching him, always alert, reminding him that their pact could not be broken. Chapter 10. The final warning. A year later, Diego decided to visit his grandfather's grave in the village. While there, he felt a strange uneasiness, as if something was calling him back to the cabin. Upon arriving, he found a note on the table, in the same ancient handwriting. "Remember, we are always watching." Diego understood that the pact was eternal, that as long as he lived in the forest, his life depended on respecting the rules of the guardians. He closed the door of the cabin, feeling a mixture of respect and fear, knowing that his destiny was sealed along with the whispers of the forest.